Good afternoon. We are here to talk about an historic event, which you are going to report about. For the first time in the history of our country, we are going to pass a bill through the House of Representatives that says those who happen to live within these three corners and a river are full citizens of America and should be accorded, therefore, the full rights of citizenship in our country. I am so very proud of Eleanor Holmes Norton and of Mayor Bowser and of Chair Mendelson and of Senator Strauss, who is the shadow senator. This is a rhetorical question. You need not do it. But if I were in a town meeting and I asked people to raise their hand if they wanted a shadow senator, I doubt that a hand would be raised. With all due respect, Senator. Because they don't want to have shadow representatives. They want to have real voting consequential representatives. And that's why we're here today. And I'm pleased to also be here with Carolyn Maloney, the chair of the Government Oversight Committee, that reported this bill out. Thank you, Carolyn Maloney.
Well, thank you, Leader Hoyer, for moving it to the floor.
And my departed colleague, whose famous statement, "We are better than this," believed that we are better than disenfranchising 700,000 of our fellow citizens. Tomorrow, as I say, the House will pass this historic legislation. It has 226 co-sponsors at this time. This is a long overdue, not only for the representation and full self-government of the district, but also for advancing a key civil rights issue in our country. We say that Black lives matter. For too long in our history, Black lives have not mattered. Some people say, well, all lives matter. Yes, they do. But Black lives have been taken for granted for too long in this country. We're doing a bill today that will try to redress some of that grievance. As President Obama said, at the 50th anniversary in Selma, Alabama, of the march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And what were they marching for? For voting rights. And that's what we're voting on tomorrow, voting rights. With all due respect, Senator, not for shadow senators, but for real voting consequential senators and members of the House. This is an important step in removing a blot on our democracy. We are the only country, free country in the world, from all our research, that doesn't have a voting member of their parliament in their country. We call our parliament the Congress. Eleanor Holmes Norton is an extraordinarily effective member of the Congress of the United States, a full member of the Congress of the United States, but we don't allow her to vote on the floor of the House of Representatives, which means 700,000 people are voiceless in our country. That's not what our democracy is about. Both today, in this bill on justice in policing, we say that all people are created equal. And tomorrow we will say that 700,000 of those people who are created equal will have a vote. So this is a historic meeting of the Congress of the United States this week. When someone moves into the district from another state, that person, that American, is effectively disenfranchised, simply because they moved to the capital of their nation. How ironic that you would come to the capital of your nation and your nation would say to you, sorry, you no longer have a voting member. Having trouble keeping my nose covered here. That runs counter to our founders' declaration that all are created equal. I have been a long-time strong supporter of the District of Columbia having a voting member of the Congress of the United States. And I knew how difficult it would be for them to be a state. So I focused on that and worked with Ms. Norton on that. And by the way, she has always been the strongest voice for statehood in this nation, not just in the District of Columbia, in this nation. And I have come to the conclusion after talking to the mayor. The mayor came to my office, we had a great discussion, and I expressed reservations. But I concluded, and this was over a year ago, I concluded the only way that we are going to treat the citizens of the District of Columbia as equals is to make them a state. And that's why I'm here, urging my members, urging my Republican colleagues to vote for this bill. Stand up for democracy, stand up for the principles of our country. So now I'm pleased to yield to the chair of the committee, who I've already referenced, who presided as that bill passed out of the committee, after Elijah Cummings presided over the hearing. And if he were here, he'd say, we're better than this. And Madam Mayor and Mr. Chair, when we pass this bill, we will be better. Our country will be more democratic, with a small d. Our country will live out the promises it has made throughout our history, but never fully honored. Ladies and gentlemen, the chair of the Oversight Committee, Chairwoman Carolyn Maloney from New York.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, and I am so pleased that the House will vote on H.R. 51 tomorrow. This will be an historic occasion, the first time in a generation that Congress will vote to give the citizens of the district full voting rights and representation in Congress. I would like to thank my good friend and my fellow Oversight Committee member, Eleanor Holmes Norton, for her sustained and unparalleled advocacy on behalf of the people of the District of Columbia. I would like also to thank Majority Leader Hoyer and Speaker Pelosi for their commitment to putting this bill on the floor of the House. District of Columbia residents pay more in federal taxes than 22 states, and more in federal taxes per capita than any state. Yes, the people of the District of Columbia are still taxed with no voting representation in Congress. This is not the vision of our founding fathers who led the revolution opposing taxation without representation. The residents of the district have been petitioning for congressional voting rights and local self-government for more than 200 years. Yet neither chamber of Congress has ever passed the D.C. Statehood bill. And this is about to change. The Oversight Committee marked up and passed this bill earlier this year, and we are very proud that our leadership will be bringing it to the floor tomorrow, where it will pass for the first time in history. I want to close by again commending Congresswoman Norton for her tireless work to extend voting rights to residents of the district. She has demonstrated continued leadership and has worked valiantly for the enfranchisement of the residents of her district. And thank you, Eleanor.
Let me say two things about you.
I want to yield first to the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi.
Good afternoon. Once again, it is an honor to welcome the Mayor of Washington to the capital of the United States, and the President of the City Council and the Fellow Senator, Mr. Mendelson, thank you for being here as well. I join in singing the praises of the Mayor. She has made us all so proud throughout her tenure, but in the last month or so, the world knows why we are so proud to a greater degree than they might have. Thank you so much, Madam Mayor. And we are here together with common cause about justice. It's always about justice and fairness. So I'm pleased to join my colleague, Leader Hoyer, for whom this has been a major priority in his service in Congress, and of course, Eleanor Holmes Norton. When we were together recently, I sang the praises of Eleanor and how she has been such a leader in so many ways in the Congress of the United States, helping women have the right to vote really effectively, honoring the 100-year anniversary and the rest, but also ensuring that people's votes are counted as cast. In so many ways, justice has been Eleanor Holmes Norton's call. So here we are to correct an injustice. The people of Washington, D.C., as we've heard Steny say and Eleanor say and others say over and over again, and I'm so glad our colleague Sheila Jackson Lee is here. And to follow Carolyn Maloney is an honor for me because this is the committee of jurisdiction. This is the committee on which Eleanor Holmes Norton serves, among others, and this is where it happens. But here are the people of Washington, D.C. They pay taxes. More important than that, serve in the military, contribute to the vitality of America and the economic strength of our country in a very powerful way. And what? Do not have the right to representation in the Congress of the United States? How could it be? Whose idea was that? For more than 2 centuries, the residents of Washington, D.C. have been denied their right to fully participate in democracy. And tomorrow we will be having, on the floor of the House, we will right this grave injustice, which is an affront to our democracy. Passage of H.R. 51, I love the name, Washington, D.C. Admissions Act, will be historic and heroic, yes, and will take this strong step toward admitting the state of Washington, Douglas Commonwealth, into the Union. And it'll bring our nation closer to our founding ideals, which were to create equal and just representation in our country. And with that, I'm pleased to yield back to Eleanor Holmes Norton, made this day possible in so many ways. It probably will come as a surprise to you, mayors and representatives and the rest, that Eleanor Holmes Norton has been relentless, persistent, dissatisfied, and here we are.
Which is to say she's been Eleanor Holmes Norton.
I yield back. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. You see gathered here today the leadership of the majority party in the House of Representatives and the leadership of the District of Columbia as we make final preparations for tomorrow's historic debate and vote that all of us here have worked to achieve. Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Majority Leader Steny Hoyer, Oversight and Government Reform Chair, who I'm glad was able to join us, Mayor Muriel Bowser, D.C. Council Chair Phil Mendelson, Statehood Senator Paul Strice. Thank you all for standing together to ensure that the citizens of your nation's capital are on their way to achieving equality with other Americans. American citizens have nothing in common with the citizens of the capitals around the world, because we alone deprive the citizens of our capital of the same rights that all others in the country enjoy. Across the United States today, Americans are taking down the remnants of the Confederacy as symbols of inequality. Just as the House of Representatives is raising up its nation's capital to ensure equality for its citizens. Not long after being elected to the House of Representatives, I got the first ever vote on D.C. statehood. Even with my party in power then, I did not succeed because some Democrats opposed the bill. Today, however, Democrats from every section of the nation are united on the principle that equal responsibilities, such as paying federal taxes to support the nation and serving in the armed forces to defend it, demand equal rights in return. My service in the Congress has been dedicated to achieving equality for the people I represent, which only statehood can provide. My life as a third-generation Washingtonian has marched toward this milestone, mindful that my own family has never known equality in our own country. My great-grandfather, Richard Holmes, walked away as a slave from a plantation in Virginia. I continue on the walk that my family has made since then to freedom in this city, until all of us who live here today in the District of Columbia can go the full distance to achieving the prize of equal citizenship with D.C. statehood. I'm pleased to introduce the mayor of our city, Mayor Muriel Bowser. I've already put a bill in, even before the bill passes, to give her her rightful name, Governor of the state of New Columbia.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I am so pleased to be here, and I want to thank you, Madam Speaker, for your wonderful hospitality, Leader Hoyer, Chairwoman Maloney, and of course, our Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton for the many decades of hard work that she has done to get us here today. It is not lost on us in Washington, D.C., that joining with our Congresswoman were three Marylanders, a daughter of Maryland, a son of Maryland, an adopted son of Maryland, who helped us get here today. I say frequently to residents of D.C., we love our folks from Maryland because, after all, they are our cousins. And our cousins have watched the disenfranchisement of D.C. residents for too long, and today they preside over the House of Representatives that will bring this bill to the floor. Congresswoman Maloney, I want to thank you for your leadership in skillfully chairing what was the hearing that got this bill to the floor. We are so appreciative. I'm really here today to speak in gratitude on behalf of the 706,000 residents of Washington, D.C., full-blooded Americans, taxpayers, people who serve in our military, people who raise families, start businesses, and are in every way American citizens, except for the fact that we don't get to vote in the capital of the United States of America. This is a historic wrong. It must be corrected. It is not a partisan issue. It is an American issue. The principles of our democracy are based in the fact that every person is represented equally, and all those who pay taxes should be represented. So while it is my great pleasure to be the mayor of my hometown, born here without a vote, but I swear I will not die here without a vote, because we know that everyone all across the United States now knows and recognizes the plight of Washington, D.C. Not only do we not have voting senators and our congresswomen not have the right to vote, the whims of a federal government can encroach upon our even limited autonomy. And it can do so in ways that are threats to all of the American states and all of the American people. The way we say no is to make D.C. a state. Let's fight back against the cries that we're too liberal, or we're too black, or there are too many Democrats. Who we elect is our business. And the business of America is to make sure that each person is represented fully in this House and in the Senate of the United States of America. So I want to thank you on behalf of so many people that would be standing here with Phil and I, and with Paul and I, and with our Congresswoman who have worked on this issue for so many decades. The grassroots, our allies in organizations across the United States of America who are educating Americans each and every day. We are grateful for the vote tomorrow, but we also know that our work will not be done. I do not let any member of the Congress off the hook, regardless of party or regardless of the House. There is time to pass our bill in the Senate, and we want to call for a vote on our bill. We also want to make sure that if this goes into next year, that we're lined up for a vote on D.C. statehood in the first 100 days of the next administration. Thank you all very much.
Now, the chair of the D.C. City Council, you know, I said to him, I was president of the Maryland Senate some years ago, a long time ago. So he's perhaps the president of the Senate or the president of the legislature or the president of the House, but he's the chair of the D.C. City Council, Phil Mendelson. Phil?
Thank you, Leader Hoyer. Thank you, Speaker Pelosi and Chairwoman Maloney, and my colleagues, Mayor Bowser and Shadow Senator Strauss. You know, the only argument against full citizenship and voting rights for citizens of the District of Columbia who are citizens of the United States of America is an argument about the Constitution and what the Founding Fathers meant. So I thought I would go back and I would read the Federalist Papers or look through them. There are a lot of chapters that were written that comprise the Federalist Papers, and I went through it and I went through it, and to tell you the truth, there's a lot to read and there's nothing about the District of Columbia. I had to get glasses because of it. Nearly going blind, looking for discussion in the Federalist Papers about depriving the residents of the national capital of their citizenship, because you won't find it. You just won't find it. There's a lot of discussion in one paragraph about all these reasons why the district has to be separate, that we don't want one state to be favored or other states to be disfavored, or for the federal government to somehow be disadvantaged. But there's nothing about citizenship, about taking away the full citizenship of the residents, the citizens of the nation's capital. The Founding Fathers simply wanted a capital independent of the 13 sovereign states. And where we are today, of course, is nothing that they could have imagined 240 years ago. But where we are is that we have a nation's capital that's larger than 2 states, comparable in size to 2 other states. And yet they have a voting representative in Congress, 2 senators in the Senate, and we have none of that. I do want to acknowledge Eleanor Holmes Norton without a vote, who does a remarkable job being our warrior on the Hill.
Amen.
But I am hopeful and I am thankful to the leadership of the House for moving forward with this legislation for tomorrow. But I know that the debate is going to be painful because the opponents are going to grasp at any argument. They will argue that we are too corrupt because that was a convenient argument to make during the hearing last fall. It doesn't stick. We cleaned up our mess. It can't be a litmus test for statehood because other states have had far, far worse situations. Or that we're too small, or that we're too urban, or that we're too reliant on a federal payment, even though we no longer get but the tiniest federal payment, less than 1% of our budget. We no longer get the federal payment that we used to get. Or it used to be that we're too inept. We can't run our finances, even though now we have the best finances of arguably any jurisdiction in the country, even in the current recession. Or the 3 twos, too liberal, too Democrat, too black. Those cannot be reasons to deny citizenship. They just can't be. The mayor said it right when she said that this is not a partisan issue, and yet I think we will see with the debate that it is a partisan issue, but it should not be a partisan issue because citizenship should not be a partisan issue. As others have said, the United States of America, which I like to think is a beacon of freedom and democracy in the world, is the only free country where the national capital has no representation. H.R. 51 corrects that injustice. I'm fully supportive of it going forward, and I again thank the leadership for this.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Let me say about this political argument. Alaska and Hawaii were introduced into the Union in the same year. And almost everybody in Washington believed that Alaska would be a Democratic state. And they believed that Hawaii would be a Republican state. The opposite is true. So the constitutional framers, the Federalist Papers, nobody thought that states would be admitted on the basis of their politics. Rather, they would be admitted on the basic premise of their citizenship as Americans. And to consider other non-germane items in casting your vote is un-American. So I'm pleased to be here with all of you. And Madam Mayor, we're so proud of you. And you are right. Your representative is as effective as any representative, and she has one arm tied behind her back. Maybe both arms tied behind her back. But the Speaker and I are committed to getting this bill as law. Not just committed to getting it through the House. We're committed to getting it to be law. And as long as it takes us, we're going to take John Lewis's advice. We're going to keep our eye on the prize, which is statehood for the District of Columbia. Are there any questions before the Speaker leaves?
Yeah, Georgia Republican Congressman Joey Nice essentially said that D.C. is not ready to do it economically, and also said that basically cited the looting and the damage related to recent protests. I'm sure any number of people like to remember that question.
He's from Georgia? He's from where? He's from Georgia. Georgia. Well, hopefully they're going to treat all their citizens equally at some point in time. But let me tell you something. It is strange that a representative of a state that committed sedition, instituted slavery, segregation, and Jim Crow, to say that somehow the District of Columbia is not deserving of statehood. Frankly, if that were the criteria, states would come in and out. In and out. The criteria is citizenship as Americans. That's the criteria. And the rationalization otherwise is for reasons that I won't question, but ought to be questioned.
Just to follow up, Mayor.
Anybody, the mayor, you want to?
Mayor, you addressed the fact that the protests
Well, sure. Let me first address your earlier question about the district's finances. And I'm not an expert on Georgia's finances, but I do know mine pretty well. And our city has balanced 24 budgets. We have reserve funds that have allowed us to balance this budget that's in front of the council right now. We have a AAA bond rating. And unlike the representative's district or any city in Georgia, we function as a city, a county, and a state. We are attracting residents and businesses, and we're very proud of the progress of our schools, public safety, and city services. So I frequently tell people I wouldn't trade places with any mayor or governor in the United States of America. And I feel very good about our position to come back from the current recession, as Mr. Mendelson has already stated. What is clear to me from the attention that Americans have paid to the district is something that we know already, that they don't really know, in a lot of cases, that we're different than they are. They assume they're United States citizens. They know we have a congresswoman, so they don't even think about the fact that we don't have voting senators or a congresswoman doesn't have the vote. And it certainly never occurred to them that the president could move the Army to address a local policing matter. And so that has been, I know Congresswoman Norton and all of us have been very focused on talking about that and making sure that the residents of the United States recognize that the only way to address that is through statehood. It's also been very important for us to explain that you're still going to have a nation's capital when we become the 51st state. There will be a federal enclave that the Congress will continue to exercise jurisdiction over. It will encompass all of the major federal buildings and functions of the federal government, the National Mall, the museums, and memorials. But it won't have 700,000 people in it that don't have a vote. And so that is what has been my pleasure to talk to the people of America about.
Ask a question we should acknowledge, too, and it's good to see everybody. Thank you for this. I say that, too, as one of the original people that was jailed, along with Paul and others during those weeks in '93 when we first got the vote. Can we talk about the significance of the name of the new state as we talk about Juneteenth and Black Lives Matter? Because a lot of people haven't heard what the name of the new state would be. Please.
Well, the new state incorporates its name today for George Washington, the father of our country, who was a steady hand as our country was formed. It also includes the name of a famous Marylander. George Washington was a Virginian. Frederick Douglass was born a slave on the eastern shore of Maryland. That was not the life he chose for himself. And he escaped, and he became one of the great intellects of America, one of the great citizens of America, and was critically important in advising and urging President Lincoln to sign the Emancipation Proclamation. There is a picture, if you go into my conference room, of Frederick Douglass. And what an appropriate name. George Washington and Frederick Douglass joined together in support of citizenship. What an appropriate name, it seems to me, for the capital of America. To honor two of its citizens, one white, one black, but both committed to the Union and committed to the citizenship. Nancy will tell you Frederick Douglass was a great fighter for women's rights, not just African American rights, women's rights. Indeed, for everybody, life and citizenship mattering. And Frederick Douglass was one of the great spokespersons for Black Lives Matter. What a great name for a great part of our country, with great representatives. And I want to make it clear, Georgia's come a long way. The District of Columbia has had problems, like every jurisdiction I know. Should we therefore remove them from the union? Of course not. Should we include them in the union as American citizens deserve to be? Of course. Full citizenship. Okay?
There's obviously, given the Senate's reluctance to even consider this, what some legislative middle ground might be, Congresswoman, perhaps a middle ground giving you the vote and the mayor more control over, law enforcement or the National Guard. Would that be an acceptable sort of endpoint legislatively?
The question is there a middle ground? Let me speak about legislation that passes the House and how I've had to work on legislation going over to the Senate where we have no representation and often getting compromises of one kind or the other. The first thing to note is that if you look at the polls, they could change, but as I speak, they overwhelmingly favor Democrats taking over the Senate. That speaks loudly to everyone before you about the chances for this bill in the Senate. Speaking even more loudly are what the polls tell us about the President of the United States. The reason he's going around spreading coronavirus, I've never seen such irresponsibility on the part of even an ordinary citizen, much less an elected official, is that his poll numbers are so low that his presidency is threatened. So the first thing we ask you to do is to look at how the House operates. Indeed, the only thing happening in the Senate now is passing legislation that affects judges. But in time, there wouldn't be a United States of America if matters didn't pass. So we're not prepared to negotiate full representation in the House and the Senate, and we certainly can't give up taxation because that's going to happen anyway. We're open to any kind of reasonable compromise. It's never occurred to us what that compromise should be, but we think after the last election, even the Republicans would want to sit down and say, what can we do? So thank you for that question.
Let me just, if I can add to that, just partial citizenship is not an option. Partial citizenship is not an option. We can't deal away the rights of an American simply because they live in the District of Columbia. The option is to recognize 706,000 people as full and equal citizens of the United States of America with voting rights in the capital, in their parliament. And that's where I think we ought to go. Speaker?
Okay. I listened carefully to your question, and it occurred to me that we are in the middle ground. That's where we are. And I didn't indulge in going into my family history, but when I was born, my father was a member of Congress from Baltimore, and he was the chair of the District of Columbia Appropriations Subcommittee. And as such, he was deemed the mayor of Washington because that committee made so many decisions for the city of Washington with no real reason to do so because it was the Congress of the United States, not the city government. And he was a big believer in home rule. So that's why this issue is so in my DNA, just something we will continue to fight for until the fight is won. He was a big believer in home rule, and then all of a sudden, you're too young, but there wasn't a mayor. And then there was a mayor, and we've come down a path. And the next step is statehood for Washington, Frederick, Douglass State. So this is the middle ground. We've come a long way in this, right, Mayor? Got it right. Yeah, so, okay. Thank you.
Keep our eye on the prize.